You're listening to the Garage Gardeners Radio Show, where we talk about extending the gardening season and pushing garden boundaries. We talk to creative gardeners and garden experts who break the rules and make new ones. Now, here are your hosts, the daughter and father duo, Emma Biggs and Stephen Biggs.
Hey everyone, I'm Emma Biggs, and thanks for hanging out with us today on the Garage Gardeners Radio Show. I'm a 14-year-old garden writer and speaker, and I love growing tomatoes. I'm an extreme gardener, and I want the garden season to never end.
Hey everybody, I'm Stephen Biggs. I write and speak about the food chain, farms, food, and gardens, and I'm a fig pig. One of my favorite plants is the fig. I have lots of fig plants around my place here in Toronto, and lots of other out-of-zone plants too. I just love the challenge of pushing zone boundaries. Emma and I also think gardening's a great way to hang out together, and we're glad you're hanging out with us here today. Our show is all about extending the garden season and pushing boundaries.
Now you're probably wondering where we got the name The Garage Gardeners. Well, Dad and I use our garage to extend the growing season. I grow heat-loving crops like tomatoes and peppers on our garage rooftop, and Dad stores his dormant fig trees in our garage over the winter. It helps us extend the growing season and store plants over the winter. Now, if you're on YouTube, look for a channel I have with my friend Ty from Pennsylvania. We're making videos to try and inspire kids to grow and cook. And my latest video is about kale, which most people think isn't a kid-friendly crop, but there's actually some really neat varieties that have really awesome colors and textures. We're at 116 subscribers today, so please help spread the word so that we can encourage more kids to grow their own fruit and vegetables.
If you want to connect with us, you'll find me at stephenbiggs.ca and Emma at emmabiggs.ca. And on Instagram, you can find us hanging out as Garage Gardeners. And if you're tomato crazy, be sure to visit Emma on Instagram, where she hangs out as @EmmaBiggs_grows.
Now, we're super excited to have two guests today. They both push boundaries in many ways by feeding soil microbes. Our first guest, Tom Bartels, pushes garden boundaries by growing a turbocharged garden in the high desert of Colorado at an elevation of 6,500 feet and growing in a growing season of about 130 days. Our second guest, Ryan Cullen, is the field supervisor and an instructor at Durham College here in the Durham region. He is really pushing boundaries by bringing back the soil microbiology and farming on a former industrial site. And actually, Ryan is hanging out with us in the studio today. Hey, Ryan.
Hey, Emma. Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us in person. Now, we can't forget to mention that my two younger brothers are here, Quinn and Keaton as well. They're hanging out in the studio because I'm not at home to babysit them.
Well, I should also mention that in every show, Emma has a tomato talk segment and I have a Biggs on Figs segment. And the segments are on hold for today to give us as much time as possible with our two guests. But Emma might just slip in a tomato question or two for Tom and Ryan. The Biggs on Figs and tomato talk segments will be back in the next episode. Now, I also want to say that we're always looking for inspiring fig and tomato enthusiasts for our segments. And if you know somebody, please let us know. We'd love to chat with them. So send us your ideas through my website, stephenbiggs.ca. Now, it used to drive my wife, Shelley, absolutely insane when I filled up our Chevy Cavalier with fresh horse manure every February. And what I was doing was I was going to the local horse stable, filling up garbage bags with fresh horse manure, and I'd bring it all home, and I would make what's called a hotbed, which is really just a cold frame that's heated from underneath. And you see the horse manure, as it decomposes, you put a thick layer of it under the soil, it gives off heat. And that's all thanks to microbes in this hotbed. So our first guest today, Tom Bartels, knows all about using microbes to make heat. And in fact, I first learned about Tom when I stumbled on his video about using microbes and compost to heat a hot tub. And I just thought it was really neat. As Emma said, Tom gardens in Colorado, elevation of 6,500 feet. He's way up high with a really short growing season, but he gets, in his 1,300-foot square garden, he harvests over 1,000 pounds of produce every year. So Tom's background is media. He has a real focus on environmental education, and that really shows if you check out some of his videos. And you can find him on his website, which is growfoodwell.com. And you'll find him hanging out on Facebook and on YouTube as Grow Food Well.
Now, Tom, before we start, I want to say that I've been stuck with Dad on lots of those trips for horse manure. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, Tom, let's start out and just by finding out a little bit about your garden, because it sure sounds like you get a lot of produce out of there.
Well, we do. We do have about 1,400 square feet, and it's mixed with vegetables and fruits. And then my wife does a lot of perennials and herb gardening, and that's all fed on site by kind of recycling all the nutrient and chaff and carbon that's around the garden, as well as adding leaves and, as you say, the wood chip compost as well, and bring that all back into the soil to feed the soil food web, which kind of runs everything.
Okay. Now, I guess I should start out too by asking you about this hot tub, because that's what kind of caught my attention in the first place. Can you describe for our listeners just how that works?
Well, it's first of all, you're taking wood chips out of the waste stream. I got these wood chips from a lot of tree trimmers that were paying to dump their wood chips, which happens in most towns. And instead, you take these wood chips, they pile, we had probably 20 truckloads of them, and you organize them in a pile that ends up being about 6 feet tall, about 12-foot diameter, so it's a pretty good-sized pile of wood chips. And as you layer these, you don't simply dump them in one pile. You layer them in roughly 10-inch layers between this plastic pipe that's coiled throughout it. I have several hundred feet of drinking water certified P-pipe in there. And so what that does is those layers of pipe collects the heat that builds up when the bacteria on these soaked wood chips start heating up, and they start breaking down the wood chips. And you can gain quite a bit of BTUs over the course of about 18 months. And the pile heats up to about 140 to 150 degrees and will stay there for 18 months in a row. So you can take that hot water as it's cycling off this pile and easily heat a hot tub and keep it at between 104 and 108 degrees 24/7 for 18 months. So it got us through 2 Colorado winters with a free hot tub. And it was just to use it as a test on whether the concept would work or not. A lot of people use it for heating greenhouses or running into radiant heat systems in their floor in their houses. And I wanted to try it as a hot tub, and I had never seen that done before, so it was kind of a proof of concept project.
Wow.
That's really neat. Dad, I think we need a hot tub.
I think so. So what kind of reaction have you had from people since you've shared that concept out there?
Oh, it's piqued the interest of a lot of people because they didn't realize how much heat you can generate. It's the BTU equivalent of burning about 7 cords of wood, but there's no combustion. And then the multiple benefit is, after you're done using this heat for whatever use you want it for, let it be, heating a house, heating a greenhouse, whatever you're doing with it, it then becomes a huge pile of organic compost because it's broken down to the point where you can add it to your gardens. It's not raw wood chips anymore. It's broken down to its minimal constituents. And I also add several thousand worms to it for the last few months after the heat dissipates, and the worms take it the rest of the way. So I end up with approximately 50 or so wheelbarrow loads of worm castings at the end of the process that then go back into the soil. So you're sequestering all that carbon and adding all this great nutrient load to the garden bed. So it's got multiple benefits.
Wow. I've been wanting a greenhouse for a really long time, so I think maybe we could do that by having our own pile of wood chips to heat the greenhouse, plus we could have a hot tub, and then we could have tons of worm castings, too.
Exactly.
So 7 cords of wood equivalent.
Wrong with that equation.
Yeah. I'm just struck by that number, 7 cords of wood, Tom. That's huge.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of heat that comes off of that pile.
Mm-hmm. And now I wasn't clear, when you're done extracting the heat, you are leaving it for a little bit with the worms at that point to let it finish working before it goes into the garden beds. Is that right?
Right. I'd like to not add too much wood, even in pulp form, when it's partially broken down. And so the worms do a really good job of breaking it another step further, and it's just straight worm castings at that point. And then you can safely add it to any garden without top-loading too much carbon to that system. Because you don't want to take wood chips straight in and work them into your soil. You can use them as mulch, but then when you break them down further with worms, then you can add them as a finished compost material to add to kind of supercharge the soil food web.
Okay. I think Ryan has a question.
Yeah, I'm just curious. What's the time frame? What's the length of the process from when you get the wood chips to they're broken down to a usable form for your garden?
Well, it produces heat. It's sort of like a bell curve on a standard compost pile. It'll rise up in about the first 8 days to 2 weeks, and it'll be building temperature. Then it hits about 159 was my highest peak temperature. Then it stays between 140 and 150 straight through for 18 months. And then you'll see it start dissipating. And as it gets below, say, 100 degrees on the main pile, which is like 19 or 20 months, then it starts being less useful for a hot tub, because then you can't heat a hot tub above 100. Then you have useful 90-degree water coming off the pile, but it depends on what you're using it for, but it has less power at that point. So when you dissipate the heat off the pile, the temperature swing is a lot more extreme. It has less ability to regenerate that heat. And that's about when I put the worms in, and they take an additional 2 or 3 months to take what's left in that pile and complete the process and turn it into full castings. You could just leave it and it will continue composting, but the worms actually speed that up. So it's maybe 2 years, start to finish, from raw wood chips to getting 50 wheelbarrow loads of finished worm castings. But at the same time, I didn't turn the piles, I didn't do anything. So it's 2 years when that's kind of doing its own thing, and I'm just kind of enjoying the heat via the hot tub and waiting for that compost to be ready.
No turning. That's such a big thing. Wow.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, with the wood chips, have you experimented with different types of wood, or do you even have an option between different types, or do you just take what you're given?
I do, and if people are interested in this, it's modeled, it's kind of a hybridized version of what's called the John Payne method, and he was a Frenchman. 1950s through the 80s was most of his work. He was doing this on his farm and running his house heat on it, and also creating a biodigester in the middle of the pile, which I'm not doing. But he, in his suggestions that I followed, you want some deciduous wood in there as well as the conifers. Typically in my region in Durango, there's a lot of pine tree chipping because of the beetle kill, but you don't want to use all pine because it doesn't heat up as well as some of the deciduous. So there were some fruit trees that got pulled in and some other trees that were trimmed in town that got thrown in the pile. And the key here is you want small diameter branches that have the cambium layer inside that outer bark, and that creates enough nitrogen to kickstart the process. If you get larger diameter wood, it's much more woody, less of the nitrogen to the ratio is different. So you want smaller diameter branches, deciduous trees, mixed in with some spruce, pine, etc., which is a lot more readily available, but it's a mixture.
Okay. And then that way you don't need to have an external nitrogen source that you're adding to this system, if you get that right mix.
That's correct. And to hedge my bets, I did put a little bit of sheep manure in there. It's about 5% of the material in that particular experiment was sheep manure, and a little bit of sawdust. And what the sawdust does is, as you're soaking this pile down, there's about 4,000 gallons of water suspended in this pile once it's saturated, and you saturate it in layers as you're building it. But between all that saturation and the sawdust and a little bit of the sheep manure, it jump-starts the bacteria, and the sawdust allows a bridge fuel for the bacteria to then work on the larger wood chips and starting to break into that wood chip layer. So there's a little bit of subtlety as far as layering that material, but it's 95% wood chips, so it's pretty simple.
And is it open to the elements, or do you have it covered with a tarp?
Yeah, I leave it open for the entire time. Some people tarp it. It would stay hotter longer, but then the problem with tarping is you got to remember to pull it off each month or so to allow it to regenerate water, because the heat will start dissipating the moisture content in the pile. And what I do is I let the rain and snow just sit on it and regenerate that moisture, because the moisture is the one thing that keeps it running. Much like on a compost pile, if it runs dry, it stops heating up. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that moisture content is replenished. And the easiest way to do that, I'm always into low labor. I found the easiest way is just leave it open to the elements. As it gets soaked in rain and snow, that snow will trickle down in and replenish that water. And you can't overwater this thing. If it gets too wet, it'll drip through the pile and just run out the bottom. So that's the one thing you want to continue having. If you cover a pile, you're protecting it from the elements, but then you're also using that finite amount of moisture in the pile, and then it gets drier over time, over months.
Okay. Wow. I'm very inspired by what you've described there, Tom.
Oh, it's a fun project. I suggest it for anyone, from a science-based experiment. It's wonderful for kids. It's wonderful for adults to understand the power of microbiology and what it can do as far as heat generation, but then this transition of this material from what we culturally see as a waste material, these wood chips that get thrown out, and now you turn it into this regenerative fuel for your garden after you're done using the heat. It's more aligned with how natural systems work, so that's why I like to teach it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, Tom, I want to jump back to your garden. You're at 1,300. You have a 1,300 square foot garden at 6,500 feet, and only 130 days in which you can really grow. That's a really short growing season. I'm kind of curious to see what you're growing and how you're growing it, and the season extension methods that you may be using.
Well, I grow a pretty good cross-reference of about 30 or 40 different types of vegetables. And what I'm doing typically, I've been doing this 18 years now running, and I trained with a gentleman named John Jevons out of California in Willits. He was a student of Ellen Chadwick's, and he teaches bio-intensive growing techniques, which is pretty much what I use. I've hybridized some of the methods, but it's based on trying to use natural organic systems to grow nutrient density in small square footage. So by using those techniques, it starts with double digging, lots of compost, cover crops, cycling nutrients, and I'm adding a lot of worm activity and worm castings to the system. But because of that and the way that this soil food web is so active, I get away with planting distances between plants that you typically couldn't get away with in a regular garden. So the bed is so active and so deeply amended that plants can be next to each other and they don't compete. So you don't get spinach fighting each other for lateral space in the garden. They just go deep with the roots, and they're quite comfortable being crowded up next to the other spinach plants. So you get to a place where you can produce higher densities of nutrition in small spaces. So the biointensive methods happen, or they create that condition. So I'm growing tons of greens, collards, kale, arugula. I grow corn, Hopi blue corn, and I save all the seed on most of this stuff and regrow it from the seed from the previous year. I like Peruvian purple potatoes because of the nutrient density of those. They also grow at a similar altitude that we kind of enjoy in Durango. Mm-hmm. Cucumbers, pole beans, winter squash, like 6 different types of winter squash, beans, peas, all the regular stuff. But the corn I love, sunflowers, tons of flowers intermixed with all the vegetables to create as much attraction for the pollinators as possible, because this whole method is based on heightening diversity. And the more diversity you have, the more equilibrium and stability you have in that system. So even with insects, it's kind of designed around attracting as many insects as possible, because then the beneficials will keep all the pests in check, and you don't have to go fighting insects or wasting time with that. It also, because of the way it's planted and the density, you only have to weed once a year, and that saves a lot of work just by the nature of how these plants grow in high-intensity beds. They actually shade out all the solar real estate, so they outcompete the weeds, and you just weed once right before the canopies touch, and then you don't have to weed the rest of the year.
Okay, and then those weeds are then shaded out because you have such a dense canopy.
Exactly, and then the weeds get fed to the worms or the compost or the chickens or something else, so they just become more food for the system. So all of a sudden you're not battling your weeds, they're just another nutrient source in your garden, really.
Mm-hmm.
It sure sounds nice not to have to weed every week or more.
Exactly.
Hear, hear.
Now, so on your website, you had somewhere mentioned the concept of creating a garden that runs itself. And so as you're talking about this very minimal requirement for weeding, that's what's coming through to me, is that you're creating a system that really doesn't need too much of your time once you have it going.
Yeah, I think a lot of people balk at gardening in general because they think it's too much work. And they think, oh, I'm never going to be around. I have to water every day and stand there with the hose for hours. And I think they don't realize you can sidestep most of that. I use drip feed systems, so it's a small $30 timer that sits on your hose bib, and you just have that timing super early morning, and it waters your garden for you. And humans, we have a memory lapse because we're human, and we're off doing something. We get distracted by our daily things, and we forget to garden. And if you forget to water your plants can go into stress mode, and stressed out plants attract pests and disease. So it kind of is a negative spiral. So I take that out of the equation, design it once each season by layering the drip feed out in the beds, and it takes a weekend to set it up, but then you're done watering for the entire season, and you can leave for weeks at a time, and the garden's just fine without you, so you don't have to worry about it. And if you plant it with these methods in mind, it's amazing, the jungles that happen, and they're mostly the target plants that you want, not the weed plants. So it's a lot of fun when you don't have to struggle so much. And I think the way I bring it across to people is you move from being an employee of the garden to the manager of the garden, and you choose when you want to spend your time working on things, but you don't have to be slave to it.
I love that. From the employee to the manager. Now, I guess on that note, you were talking about the double digging as you were talking about John Jevons, but I know that you're using the broad fork and you're a big proponent of it. So you've moved from one to the other. I wonder if you can talk about that for us.
Well, not only moving from one to the other, but I think the ultimate goal is to do no-till or low-till. But people that like that idea, the mistake they make is saying, oh, great, no-till, that sounds fun. I'll just throw some seeds on my grass lawn here. You at some point when you're starting a garden, in my mind, it makes sense to do that one-time tilling, basically, to set up a very good growing space, depending, of course, on the variables of people's soil that they're starting with. In my case, I had super heavy clay and boulders that wouldn't grow anything but cactus, and so I had to mitigate that, and double digging is necessary to start that process, but then each year, as I was amending the soils with more and more compost and adding that carbon to the soil and getting the soil food web activated, then a broad fork each spring, just to break it up a little bit, helped aerate that soil, but without disturbing too much of the mycelium and the bacteria and the organisms that are living just below that soil surface. And nowadays, I have tested for the last 2 years a no-till approach, and I have noticed a little less yields on some of the beds because of the compaction, the natural compaction from the clay soil. So what I think I'm going to go back to is a low-till approach with a little bit more of that garden fork each year, which then supercharges that aeration and allows more nutrient cycling throughout the year. So you don't want to intervene in that soil unless you have to. And I think for me, the new sweet spot is a little bit of that. I'm going back to what I did 2 years ago, which was just using the broad fork in the spring to break up the soil. And it's so much faster and easier than using a double dig. You shouldn't have to do that more than once or twice if you have really bad soil to start with. So I do kind of give people the inspiration to do it once. It is a lot of work. It takes about maybe 3 hours for a 100-square-foot bed to double dig, but then that's done, and then you just keep amending with compost each year. And you might have to use a broad fork here and there to fluff it up on the top end, but you're not moving that soil very much.
Okay. Now, I wanted to ask you too, because I know you have courses where you share a lot of your ideas and your techniques with people. Can you tell us about some of those, so if listeners are interested in digging into this more, they know where to go?
If I do a full curriculum course on just taking out your lawn to harvesting the vegetables and saving the seeds and cooking the food. So it tries to take home-scale horticulture to the masses and show them how they should be more comfortable with these methods. Once they learn them, there's less fear of killing plants, and so we try to go step by step and make it attainable for people, even if they have just a backyard garden that's 100 square feet. And I have members that are in, I think, 14 countries now in all 50 states. So it's fun to get a lot of feedback from them in all different growing zones and everything. And there's a lot of universal methods that work everywhere that plants like to grow. And so if people want a taste of that, I do have a little presentation they can watch for free and just go. It's about a 32-minute video that gives you an idea of kind of 5 essential methods I use to jumpstart a garden that might not be performing the way you want, to bring it up into a higher performance level, just using different techniques and methods. And I don't like people having to buy things or going to the store to buy amendments. You should be able to kind of work that out for free, and I show you how to do a lot of that. And that, if you wanted to reach it, would be growfoodwell.com/jumpstart. It's just one word, jumpstart. growfoodwell.com/jumpstart. And that just shows you the 5 essential methods to jumpstart.
Oh, I think we just lost Tom. But if you missed that, growfoodwell/jumpstart. And we were just about to say thank you and goodbye to Tom. So we'll keep going at this point. And so that was Tom Bartels and growfoodwell.com. He's also on Facebook and YouTube under Grow Food Well. And he's doing some really fascinating stuff, using wood chips not only to heat a hot tub, but to really turbo boost the microbial activity that's in his soil.
And now we're going to go home and we're going to get a hot tub and a greenhouse heated with a pile of wood chips. Now, by the way, we're always looking for inspiring people who push garden boundaries, and if you have any ideas, we'd love to hear them. You can send them through our websites, emmabiggs.ca and stephenbiggs.ca.
Okay, well, this summer I've had the pleasure of teaching horticulture at Durham College, and I'm really stoked about what the college is doing. It has a food and farming program, and the on-site farm is a 3/4-acre site, and students grow a variety of vegetables and fruits. It feeds into an on-site restaurant called Bistro 67. So students get to be exposed to the growing, the harvesting, the preparing of food, and it's really this from field to fork concept. And what's really neat about this as well is that this is a program that has an urban farming focus. So this isn't in a rural area. This is in suburban sprawl Toronto. So our guest host today and our guest for the second half of the show is Ryan Cullen, and he's the field supervisor at Durham College. And he oversees a number of employees. He oversees this 3/4-acre market garden and the orchard and the greenhouses. And he's really a passionate advocate of small-scale organic farming, and he just does an amazing job inspiring lots of future farmers. So with no further ado, let's welcome Ryan into this discussion about Durham College and this amazing food and farming program at Durham College. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, how are you guys today? Thanks for having me, Steve. Thanks, Emma.
We're so happy that you're here with us because what's happening at Durham is so amazing, because we stopped there on our way here to the studio and the fields are just packed with veggies and flowers, and it all looks so good.
Well, listening to our friend there, I think I want to steal some of his ideas, and I think I'm going to have to get onto his course on his website, because I like the idea of no weed and less labor, which is always really good. So we were spending the day today getting some weeds out of the beds. We haven't quite mastered our soil yet, but we're working on it.
So can you tell us about the site? What was the site before the garden?
Sure. So it actually used to be an old Hershey factory. So it's right at off the 401, Champlain and Thixon in Whitby, Ontario. and basically a brown soil. So we had to bring in, it's a hard clay underneath, basically construction soil. So we had to bring in a whole bunch of like triple mix right from the start just to get the garden going. And then from then, the first couple of years, it wasn't quite no-till. We were running a tractor on it and things like that. And since I've been the supervisor there, we've kind of switched over to, I wouldn't say it's a no-till yet. It's very much a low-till. And we've spent the last 2 years really trying to just build some permanent raised beds and adding organic matter into it to create that microbiology and build that soil food web. So we're still in the process of really building it. We don't have 18 years worth of soil building quite yet. So we're still at the start, but we're getting there. So we've added some amendments this year, and it is improving, and also some drainage problems as well too. But we're getting through that as well. But it's a really great site. Like as you said, 3/4 acre market garden. We have a apple orchard, about 1/4 acre of apples, 4 different varieties, and then we have a developing arboretum as well. So like a library of trees to go along with our 2 horticulture programs. So it's really fantastic, and we get to grow all the food that we grow goes right into our culinary program and our restaurant, Bistro 67 on site. So it's really extra special to have that connection with the culinary world and with the chefs as well.
Yeah. So for listeners who can't picture what that looks like, if the chef in the culinary program is looking for something that he and his students can use, how does that work practically?
Yeah, he walks down to the field, which is great. So it's funny because you guys were there today. He was downstairs. We're looking at onions to harvest. So I have a bunch of onions ready, and we have 3 or 4 different varieties that we're growing that are ready right now. And I was talking to him about them, and I said, let's just go look at them. And, it's really great because you have that connection right on your doorstep, and you can talk to the chef, and, he can tell you, this is the size of the onion I want, or this is the size of the zucchini we're looking for. And they're always looking to do different creative things. So you're not necessarily picking your zucchini or your potato or your onion at the normal size you might pick it. Bigger is not always better. They're doing all kinds of creative things in the kitchen. So, like last year we picked everything very small. So baby eggplants, baby zucchinis, tiny little root vegetables, beets and things like that, because they were doing these kind of specialty baby vegetable plates. This year, different story. They want everything a little bit bigger, a little bit different size. So that partnership we have with the chefs, and I'm in the kitchen, they're in the field all the time, it really builds a good relationship, and it makes me a better grower, and it teaches me a lot more too.
Okay. How great that those students just get to see that whole start to finish.
Yeah, it's really special for the students because a lot of our students in our horticulture programs, they're quite entrepreneurial. They're quite ambitious. They want to run their own farms. They want to build their own farms. They're growing already at home. And I think it's really special for them to get out of the classroom in the summer and they can see hands-on, day-to-day, what they're learning in the classroom and how they can apply it to the field. And I think what's super important is they get to see how they can develop an entire working farm right from the start of the season, right towards the end of the season. So it really comes full circle with them, and they're learning as they go. I'm learning as I go too, and we're feeding off each other, which is really great. A lot of them bring their own passion and a lot of knowledge and experience as well. So we all get to learn together. It's really this great camaraderie and exchange of information, and I just love it. I eat it up every day. It's great being there, and when we have yourself, Steve, coming in to teach some of the younger kids as well, and seeing the passion that we can bring out of them, just having them walk around the field, it's inspiring too.
I was curious too, the students, where are they coming from? Because this is not a traditional program. So are they people coming from the city? Are they coming from rural areas?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. We have it's an interesting cohort. We tend to get more mature students actually. So people who've been either in other industry and they have a passion or a green thumb, or they're really into kind of urban farming or just growing in general, and they're coming from different worlds, different industries, different professions, and kind of almost reinventing themselves, if you will. So we don't get the typical out of high school into college, I'm taking a course to get a job. It's a lot of them are quite entrepreneurial. A lot of them are looking to get jobs as well, but and careers in the field, but we get kind of that more mature student, which is really great. And in terms of area, most of them come from Durham region. Some of them are coming from Toronto, but we also have a large international population as well. So even on my crew of 12, I have 5 international students. 3 of them actually come from farms in India, which is really good. So they're farmers. So I'm learning things off of them, which is really great. And I can send them out in the field to, things, basic crops like potatoes and onions and carrots. They already know how to do that, or, go use the tractor. I don't have to train them up. Some of them know more about the tractor than I do, which is great. So they come with a world of experience, and it's just interesting to see the differences in, the way in which we're growing here. We very much try to practice, the John Jevons approach, biointensive and small scale urban agriculture, high yield per square foot. So it's a different paradigm from where they're coming from, where it's a little more conventional, large scale acreage, rows of vegetables. So they're seeing the differences, and I'm also learning from them how they do things. So it's really cool.
Wow. Well, you have some growth going on too. We were dealing with construction while I've been there, and so it was annoying listening to the hammering, but pretty exciting too, because there's neat things happening. Tell us about that.
Yeah, very exciting. It has been a bit of a struggle this year because we are surrounded by construction. We're farming essentially in a bit of a construction zone. However, it's all for the good. We're very lucky to be connected with the Weston Foundation, and so they donated about $1 million towards our farm last year, which was just fantastic for us. And we've used that to kind of expand some of our farm infrastructure. So some really key infrastructure that we were missing that's going to help the farm run a lot more efficient. And then also tying in with kind of your theme of your show, how we can extend the growing season. So my big special thing that we're getting is this kind of post-harvest wash pack facility where we're going to have some stainless steel sinks, dunk tanks, spray guns, climate-controlled refrigeration so we can store vegetables at the optimal temperatures, which just allows us to be more efficient, more food safe, and keep food longer, which is really, really great. And then the other 2 pieces we're getting are we're extending our greenhouse. So we currently have about 2 greenhouse bays that are less than about 1,000 square feet. So we're adding 1 more bay, and that's going to be for aquaponics production. So we'll be able to grow fish along with leafy greens and herbs. And then we're also getting a container farm, so like a freight farms, if you're familiar with them. And it's very high tech. It's going to be vertical growing, LED lights, hydroponic systems, and that's going to allow us to grow leafy greens year round, which is really special for us. So we're going to extend the growing season there. And really what we're trying to create is kind of this small scale, high yield, high tech urban farm paradigm. So we want our students to be able to come through and be able to use all the tools and grow in all the different kind of production facilities that they would see in industry. So we're trying to be kind of a bit of a melting pot for what you would see when you go in industry. So when you're training in the aquaponics or the greenhouse or the fields or the hoop house, or or low tunnels and things like that, when they go out to the real world and have a career, hopefully that they'll have good experience working in some of these production systems, and we'll be able to be a quality employee or manager.
Well, and that's one thing that I noticed at the college too, is you have different ways of doing the same thing so that the students can see that this is how you might do tomatoes in containers. This is how you might do tomatoes in small urban raised beds, and then you have them in the field. So you're doing things in different ways for those students to see, which is great.
Yeah, we really try to show what you can do at different scales of operation. So, not everybody's going to be able to afford the $100,000 greenhouse, or the $20,000 hoop house or high tunnel. So, we have a lot of tours and guests and people from the community coming in, whether they're backyard gardeners, whether they're community gardeners, or whether they're kind of larger scale conventional growers or producers. It's good for them to come in and we're kind of like a shopping window, I guess, a window shopping of different scales of operation you can demonstrate at. And that's important because we really want to be able to connect to the community. We're an urban farm as well, so we don't really fit into one paradigm. And I think it's good to show the best of both worlds. So you've seen what we're doing. We had tomatoes and cucumbers, growing up 1 central liter in our high tunnel, which what you'd kind of really see at a typical small scale, large scale greenhouse operation. But then we have, some 4x4 posts up in a little corner in kind of our little raised bed garden, just with some basic wire and some strings dropping down to kind of mimic that similar production technique to show people like, hey, you can still grow like this in your backyard and do it pretty easily and very cheaply.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think it's great that you show so many different methods. I've seen people doing the crate gardening or in the big container gardening and the aquaponics. So I'm really excited when that's all done to go back and visit.
Yeah, it's going to be great when we finally get the construction done and we can kind of tidy everything up and start to really design out some of the smaller little spaces that I've got kind of my eye set on as well. And we really want it to be kind of a working model of what a small-scale urban farm could potentially be. So people could come in, have a look, and say, like, hey, I like that, I like that, I like that. Maybe I can't be at that scale, but you could be able to come to our farm site and look at what we're doing, talk to our students, and kind of pick and choose and say, hey, that would work in my context, that would work in my context, and utilize those either techniques or infrastructure. And same with our students graduating. A lot of them are ambitious about either starting their own farm or going to work on other farms, and that gives them kind of the skill set to say, hey, I've worked in these different pieces of infrastructure, we've worked at these different scales, and it gives them a good diverse kind of toolbox for when they leave and go out in the working world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, what suggestions do you have for people who are thinking of getting into farming? Of course, I know you're going to say take the program in Durham,
yeah.
but just as well as that in general, what are some... Just start doing it, because nature is the best teacher. You can go get some good books. There's some great books out there. John Jevons is one of them, Biointensive Farming. There's a great book by kind of my hero, Jean-Martin Fortier, called The Market Gardener. There's some great books by a guy named Curtis Stone, The Urban Farmer in Kelowna. Get yourself a good book at kind of that models kind of what scale and what type of farming you want to do. Read it back to front, read it again, and then just start carving up your lawn and start building your farm and get to work, because the best teacher is you out there in the field, hands-on. You're gonna make lots of mistakes, and mistakes are good because it teaches you a lesson every single time. And each year you just get better and better and better. And the best thing to do is just start, and don't be afraid, and just go for it. That's powerful.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think we need to do that with the greenhouse, Dad. We just need to get a greenhouse.
You just want me to build that greenhouse.
Exactly.
Yeah. We can't forget tomato questions, because you wanted to quiz Ryan on tomatoes.
Yeah, so I want to ask you, so you talked about growing the tomatoes with 1 liter of the twine like they do in like big greenhouse production. How else are you growing the tomatoes?
Sure. So we have a very small hoop house that really just kind of mimics what you'd see in a larger scale, and what we do in there is try to mimic kind of the medium scale farm production or greenhouse production. So we do the central liter, and then we prune off all the shoots. So we tied up a string, and it's on this thing called a tomahawk. And the hook's connected to like a wire at the top. And we just prune off all the suckers, train it to 1 liter, and then we kind of bottom prune up some of the foliage off the bottom just to create airflow. And then what that allows us to do is have a little bit more yield per square foot. It's a high-density system, and it kind of allows us to control where the energy is going into the plant, so we don't have too much energy going into suckers and shoots and extra vegetative growth. It goes more into the fruit set, and then we kind of balance that with a little bit of vegetative growth, a little bit of generative growth. So it's a really cool production system. It makes it easier to harvest too, because the fruit are kind of like right there, chest, waist height. It's easy to pick, and then we lower and lean them throughout the season. So once they kind of hit the top, we'll flip the hook, drop the string, and then we lower and lean them. And you can check it out. There's all kinds of examples out there. So then we do that, and then we also do field tomatoes. So we still do, we get these big 72-inch 4-ringed steel cages, classic tomato cage, but a little bit stronger and more durable for the field. And we still do indeterminate tomatoes out there. So they're field tomatoes, but they're not the bushing type. And what we do with them is we won't do the central liter, but we'll still kind of prune them up and guide them into about 3 or 4 main stems and main branches, so we can kind of just guide how it's going up through the cage and we try to make it form almost like a bit of an umbrella, so we get good airflow coming through the bottom. Because they're out in the field, you get the rain and the water and the elements on them. We try to mitigate as much disease as possible. So bottom pruning the leaves that are touching the soil, creating airflow in there, so when it gets wet, the moisture doesn't stick, they can dry out. And then also, removing some of the leaf matter so light can get in and ripen up some of those tomatoes. So that's one technique. We do them in the cages. And then we do all our Roma tomatoes, which are more of a bush type. We don't prune them whatsoever. We might bottom prune some of the leaves that are touching the soil, but we basically kind of let them go wild. And what we do is we just put some poles about every 10 feet, and we do the Florida weave method. So we just put a string around the pole, and we'll run it down the side of the Roma tomatoes to keep all the leaves up off the ground. Then you twist it around the next pole, and you just keep going all the way down, and then you come back and kind of tuck them in. And so you have the tomato growing between these two sets of strings that kind of just keep the leaves up and growing upwards and up off the ground. And that just helps, again, mitigate disease, keeps the fruit off the ground. You get healthier fruit because they're up off the ground, they're drier. And then we just wait till they're ready and harvest.
And then they go to the bistro.
And then they go to the bistro, and the chefs are happy. It's really great.
You get to eat them for lunch.
Yeah, so right now we got, 8 or 9 different varieties of tomatoes. The chefs got this new tomato processor that they're all jacked up to use, so they said, bring it on. So I said, okay. So we planted a few extra rows this year. But we got 2 varieties of Roma, 4 varieties of kind of heirloom tomato, beefsteak style that we do in the field. So a Carolina Gold, we do a Mountain Merit, which is your classic red beefsteak. We also have these new ones called Green Zebra. So they're actually a green tomato when they're ripe and ready, which is really, really, really cool. And then another orange one, I can't remember the name of the variety for the life of me right now. And then in the greenhouse, we do the high-density cherry tomatoes, which do really, really well in that setting.
Okay. I'm hungry just thinking about them.
Right? And they're just starting to turn color right now, so it's an exciting time.
Yeah.
So since we have you in the studio, this probably merits a whole show on its own, but we were chatting in class one day. You were telling my class about ideas for access to land, because I'm hoping we've inspired some listeners now to think about maybe getting into urban farming, and share some ideas about how can people get access to land. If you don't own land, what could you do to start farming on a small scale?
Sure. Well, if you look around, everybody's got a lawn and a backyard, and vegetables are a lot more edible than your grass is. So I would start with your backyard. If you have enough space back there, is rip up that lawn, because it's just consuming water and energy and time, and start growing vegetables on it.
Or your front yard.
Or your front yard, exactly.
Yeah.
Check with your bylaw and check with your city to make sure you're allowed to first. So that's your first option. I would be looking in your neighborhood or in your own backyard is a good start. Second is there's really lots of farmers out there who have all kinds of farmland, and it's either just being used for hay or not being maybe used at all. And if you're kind of in a semi or rural or urban area, go approach a farmer or start just talking to some farmers, and if they have the infrastructure there, most of them are willing to sever off and lease you, a quarter acre or an acre for a couple $100 a year. I mean, the amount of hay or corn or wheat or soy that they're going to get off a quarter acre, it's only worth a few $100s anyway. So they'd be willing to take your money, I'm sure, if you wanted to set up a little vegetable garden in their fields. Alternatively, what you can do is really just start asking around, start putting it out there, and start talking to people. There's all kinds of land being unused, especially in the cities. You could even go to your local regional headquarters or your city and find land that the city's using. I know there's a couple of great organizations in Durham region that take land not being used by the city and they turn them into community gardens and urban farms. So that is a really great start too. I'd also go to businesses. There's lots of businesses and commercial areas out there that have buildings and large lawns that aren't being used, and I'm sure they'd be happy to let it go to vegetable production. And if you're a bit of an entrepreneur, you probably got a whole company there with a cafeteria that you could serve and maybe make a little bit of money as well. So it's tricky, really. There's an organization too in Durham. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's basically they match it's like a dating site for farmers and ambitious young growers, or ambitious growers, I should say. And they'll post up on their website, access to land, or here's my land in this area looking for anyone who wants to grow. And then people can contact them, and kind of like a trading site for land. They make it available, and then you can connect with them.
Okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So many different things you can do if you take the time to think about the opportunities.
Yeah, and I'm constantly, whenever I'm driving around, I'm just looking. I'm looking for a spot, like an empty field, and I'm like, I wonder who owns that, or that looks like a perfect spot to maybe start a farm. But the key things I would look for, so, we just partnered with, we're very lucky to partner kind of on the side, me and a friend of mine. We met a landowner who wanted to take some of his land that was being unused and turn it into a bit of an urban garden and kind of kickstart some young ambitious farmers. So we put a greenhouse up there, and we kind of started working the land and kind of changing it over, and getting ready to build a little bit of a micro farm there as well. And that was just being in the right place at the right time. But you got to be out there looking and asking questions and talking to people, and sooner or later someone's going to be like, hey, I got a 1/4 acre in my backyard that I'm not using. I'd love it if you grew vegetables. And most people are like that. They don't necessarily want to do the work, and if they're looking for somebody who might want to turn their backyard into a garden, who's capable of doing it, they'd be happy to give it up. And usually all you have to do is give them some free vegetables every week, and then you take the other 95% and you could run your own little business off of it.
Wow. As we finish up, do you have a couple neat success stories of people you've met through the college or met through other farming circles that you could tell us about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many of our students right now that are really going into some interesting fields. Off the top of my head, so one of our students, there's she actually ran our microgreen operation. So we have a bit of a microgreen operation going on at the college.
Yeah.
And last year she was on our field crew, and I kind of put her in charge of it, and she just took it and ran with it and really became a pro by the end of the year, and just really knows microgreens in and out. And she graduated and was looking for work, and for 2 months was still kind of looking, didn't kind of have anything. And through one of our faculty, I met this couple who have a small microgreen operation going on in Durham region, and they're looking to expand, and they're looking for people who had a skill set, who could do it and could manage it and didn't need a lot of training. And I mean, who knows where you're going to find like someone who knows how to grow microgreens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they came in and talked to me, and I was like, I got the perfect person for you. She's been running our microgreens for a year. She could really just pick up wherever you guys are right now and help you out. And so I put the two of them together, kind of matchmaker, and now she's off working with them, and I think things are going well.
Wow. That's nice to hear.
And then, I mean, I guess. I mean, I was a student in our program.
Mm-hmm.
Spent 2 years there in our horticulture program, and then got to go work in Quebec with Jean-Martin Fortier. And then now they hired me back, and now I get to run the field. So I've gone from student to field manager, which is quite a big leap in a couple of years. But I'm having the time of my life, and it's been great.
And you're inspiring lots of people in the process.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, we're getting to the time where we need to finish up, and I'd like to say a really big thanks for taking the time to join us in the studio today and just share what's going on at Durham and your passion for growing and urban agriculture.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and I really love what you guys are doing here. This is fantastic. Keep it up.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a lot of fun. That was Ryan Cullen, the field supervisor and an instructor at Durham College, and he's been telling us about a really neat farming program that they have taking place right here in the Toronto area. Check it out, durhamcollege.ca/programs/food-and-farming. durhamcollege.ca, programs, food, and farming. Now, the Garage Gardeners radio show is just about over for today. And just want another shout out to Ryan, thank you, and our first guest, Tom Bartels from Grow Food Well, and lots of inspiration about using microbes and soil to make really awesome produce. Hope you enjoyed the show, and if you have ideas for future guests, please send them in to us. We're really eager to know about people who are pushing garden boundaries.
You can also connect with us.
While Emma's choking, I'll tune in. You can also connect with us on Instagram, where we hang out as Garage Gardeners. And you can find Emma, if you're interested in tomatoes, check out Emma's Instagram, which is @emmabiggs_grows. If you use Apple Podcasts, you can subscribe to the podcasts there. And if you like what we do, please do rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You're listening to the Garage Gardeners Radio Show. I'm Stephen Biggs.
And I'm Emma Biggs. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to the Garage Gardeners Radio Show with your hosts, Stephen and Emma Biggs, right here on Reality Radio 101.
Hi, I'm Ryan Cullen from the W. Galen Weston Center for Food at Durham College. Be sure to tune in to the Garage Gardeners Radio Show on the first Wednesday of every month from 2 to 3 p.m. on Reality Radio 101.